Hello, thank you for joining me for another lesson here on Sage X3. In tonight's lecture, we're going to be talking a little bit about establishing standard costs within X3, what they mean, and how the organization can utilize a standard cost to help them better analyze their purchasing and manufacturing variances. Okay. So a couple things about the standard cost that's important to note. In X3, if you've worked with the system for a while, you'll know that along with the product master files, there's the concept of the product site record. Okay, so when one establishes standard cost, it's the standard cost for each stocking facility that the product is kept at. So in the system here, if I come under my common data and go to products, then over to product sites, for tonight's exercise, we're going to take a look at finished good product 301. So let's analyze that a little bit here. Okay, so I have this particular product, and I can see that I have a variety of different warehousing facilities for which this product is either manufactured and or stocked. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to look at the product site activity at the NA021 facility. So I'm going to come over here to my cost tab, and here on the product site, a couple things that you'll want to make note of. The first is the valuation method here. So in this particular case, I have a valuation method of standard being established on this product. Okay, so that's saying that anytime I have a inventory movement of this particular product, whether it be a stock inflow through the form of a purchase receipt, a work order receipt, a miscellaneous receipt, what have you, the goods are going to be brought in at the standard cost that I have set on the product. And conversely, anytime I have an inventory issue, whether that be in the form of a customer delivery, a issuance of raw materials to a work order, a miscellaneous issue, that particular inventory movement is going to be booked at standard also. Okay. So it's important to note, though, X3, you have a variety of different inventory valuation methods that you can set on your products. So if we tunnel in here, you can see the variety of different costing bases that you can set up: average log costing, FIFO costing, LIFO costing, and so forth. So standard is just one of the bases from which you can choose. Now, that being said, as it relates to the standard costing, my typical recommendation is, even if you're using one of these actual, costing bases for your products, I still recommend that the organization establish a standard cost for the product for purposes of facilitating purchase price variance analysis in the context of your raw materials, and facilitating production variance analysis in the context of your manufactured semi-finished goods and finished good items. Okay? So that's one important thing to note here on the product site. Now, if I scroll down here a little bit, next, let's take a look at this cost calculation section. Okay, so in this particular case, this is a manufactured product. So as it relates to establishing the standard cost, I have my cost update method being set here to calculate it, meaning that the expectation is that I'm not going to manually define a standard cost upon the product, but rather I'm going to utilize the standard cost calculation tool within X3 to establish the standard cost for the product. Okay, so we're going to be taking a look at this standard cost calculation tool here momentarily, but in essence, what this program will do for you is, for your manufactured product, you're going to have both a bill of material where you declare all the raw materials that are necessary to manufacture the good, and you're also going to have a process routing record associated with the product. And this process routing is going to indicate all the different work centers that are going to need to be tracked through in the fabrication process for the item. So all your setup times and your run times for each one of the work centers is going to be defined therein. So in essence, when you run this standard cost calculation program, X3 takes a look at the bill of material and all the components thereof and determines the material cost of the finished good. Then it takes a look at the routing record and determines the cost associated with machine, labor, and overheads. And basically it rolls all four of those elements up to establish a standard cost for the item. Okay. Now, conversely, what we have in here in this cost update field, we also have an entered setting that we can apply. Now, the entered setting is more commonly utilized in the case of raw materials, okay, items that you do not manufacture. Items that basically you purchase from a vendor. So, but as it relates to establishing a standard cost for the raw materials, they're going to be manually entered or imported into the system. Okay. Some other features as it relates to costing here on the product sites cost tab. We have some metrics down here in terms of what the present average cost of the item is. So this average cost metric is basically taking your the total the total valuation of the inventory that you have on hand divided by the present quantity of that inventory that you have on hand. Okay, we have metrics here in terms of the last receipt cost, last purchase price. Then down here also we have our standard cost metrics that are valid over such and such range. Okay, so if I want to go ahead and take a look at a standard cost for this, over here in my right hand panel under my cost section, I can come to standard cost, and this is going to tunnel me over to my standard cost section. So I'm going to come in here and let me go ahead and update that. So in here, a couple different things to note. Let's take a look at the present record here. As you can see here, we have our product ID, we have our warehousing site. Okay, now this field right here for fiscal year. Okay, now in X3, the discipline is that each fiscal year you're going to wish to establish a new standard cost as you come in to the new fiscal year. Okay. Now, with that being said, technically speaking, if you fail to establish a new standard cost for your item at a warehouse, even if you're outside of the validity range of the old standard cost, X3 will still go ahead and reference that old standard cost. Okay, but with that being said, my general recommendation is to always make sure to establish new standard costs for each fiscal year. Okay, so you have a true, accurate, precise baseline against which to measure your purchasing and your production performance. Okay. So here we have the validity date range over which this standard is applied. Okay. Then down here we can see that it is an updated one, so this is a fabricated item. Scrolling down here a little bit, we have a graph. Okay, So we have a level cost and a multi-level cost that we can look at here. Okay, so in here I can see that, breaking this down a little bit, we have the total cost of material for this manufactured part, $12.29. Okay, then when you have multi-level products that have multi-levels to the bill of materials, you can have material costs captured at the current level as well as lower levels within the bill of material. So the way that you interpret this is that the total material cost, when you explode down through all levels of the bill, is $12.29. But the material cost just associated with this top level product that we're analyzing, the material cost there is $8.59. Working our way down, we have a machine cost factor here of $3 and close to 13 cents per unit, a labor cost of 62 cents a unit, and an overhead cost of just over 2 cents a unit, bringing our total cost of this item to $16.07. Okay. Now it's important to note that this is a per unit cost. Okay, so whatever your stocking unit of measure is for the product. So if I come down here, I can see that the stocking unit of measure for this particular product is a case. Okay, so this is saying that my standard cost is $16.07 per case. Okay, now don't be confused with this calculation quantity that's listed here. This is not saying that it's $16.07 per 175 cases. That's not what it's saying. This is $16.07 per one individual case. Now, this calculation quantity, now what its significance is that this is the quantity over which, if you have any fixed costs, any fixed overheads or fixed overhead cost or any setup costs in your routing record, this is the quantity over which those fixed costs are going to be prorated. Okay, so that field is a matter of significance to us. Okay, so that's our level cost view of the standard. Now over here we have a multi-level total. So again, this is, if you take a look down through all levels of the bills of material, this is the total material cost, this is the total machine cost, the total labor, overhead, and then the total cost is going to be the same. So, this particular view is useful if you want to take a look at your cost breakout, basically saying, okay, show me my materials at my grand total of my material cost at all levels of the BOM, my grand total of machine cost at all levels of the BOM, labor and overhead right down the lines, as opposed to rolling up all these factors within the material component of the parent product. Okay, then finally over here on my calculation parameters, this gives me a little insights here as to how the standard was established. Okay, so in terms of the routing code and the bill of material code that I referenced when establishing the standard, my material cost, my costing dimension and overhead references, and how my fixed cost distribution was performed. Okay, so that's good. So before we take a look at the standard cost calculation function, let's take a moment here and take a look at the process of establishing standard costs for raw material, okay, because that's kind of the simpler of the two approaches. So let's kind of go straight away into our standard cost menu. So to find that, if I come under common data, then down to products, product cost than standard costs. Okay, so one of the components on this bill of material is this raw 311. Okay, and I want to take a look at it for my NA021 site. Okay, so in here, when I'm establishing a new standard cost for a raw material, now I can come in here basically and just populate the cost in my component section here. Okay, so this is a raw material, so in essence, all the cost associated with the item is going to be in the material. Okay, it's not going to have a labor and an overhead factor associated with it. Okay, now another thing that you'll note within here, over here my left list, you'll notice that for my fiscal year 5, which is my 2017 fiscal year, you'll notice that I have multiple records over here. Okay, so what X3 does here is it allows for you to reestablish standard cost multiple times throughout the course of the year. Okay, so kind of the way that this reads is starting off my 2017 fiscal year. Okay, I established a standard cost for this item of just over 5 cents per each. Then on the 21st of August of this year, I came in and I established a new standard cost for this item. Okay, now X3, if I book any inventory movements between the 21st of August and the end of the year, it's going to, utilize this standard right here. Okay. To that end, you'll also notice that there's a sequence number that's associated with the standard cost. So again, X3 is always going to seek to utilize the standard with basically the highest sequence number when you're booking new movements. Okay, so that's all there really is to establishing the standard for your raws. Now next, let's take a look at establishing standard cost for manufactured items. And to do that, we're going to use the standard cost calculation tool, which is found under Costing, Cost Calculations, Standard Cost Calculation. Alright, so in here, we're going to go, the first thing that prompts you for is the storage site. So I'm going to do my NA021 site. Down in this product section here, there's 3 different values from which we can choose the unique, all, or selection. Okay, so in this particular case, I want to do the unique because basically I wish to perform a cost calculation on one unique product. So in here, you'll notice I put my product ID in. I get this informational message saying, hey, you've already established a standard cost for this product. If you rerun this cost calculation tool, you're going to overwrite that standard. And that's okay. Like I said, you can redefine your standards many times throughout the course of the year. So that's one option. Another option here is the all option. So if I run it on this basis, basically all my products that have the standard cost updates set to calculated, it's going to go ahead and re-roll the standards for those items. Okay. Then the final option here is for selection. So with this one, this basically allows me to come in and specify, an advanced selection, say through my formula wizard. So for instance, maybe I only wanted to roll standard cost for those items that have a particular product accounting code. I could do something like that. Or maybe I only wanted to roll standards for products that had a particular product category. So basically through my formula wizard here, I can localize which groups of products I wish to re-roll the standards. Okay. But like I said, for this exercise, we're going to do the unique. Okay. We'll talk more about the calculation quantity here in a moment. Over here in my validity section, here's my fiscal year number that I'm running it for. So in my folder here, my fiscal year 5 is for my 2017 fiscal year. Down here, here's the date that's going to be assigned to the cost record. My bill of material type, I'm going to want this to be set up for manufactured in this case. We're going to talk about the concept of subcontracting in some of our later lessons, but in this case, this is a manufactured item. Next here, for the routing and bill of material code. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and choose my production routing for this. Now, what this is saying here is that within X3, you can have multiple routing in multiple bill of material codes. So you might have particular routing and BOM codes that are for R&D purposes. In this case, they give us some different ones for designing, for maintenance purposes. But your standard routing, the one that you utilize in your day-to-day production, that's the one that you're going to want to reference for purposes of establishing the standard cost. So I got my routing and BOM code. Now down in here, I have this calculate all BOM levels setting. Now, if I was to check that box, what that would serve to do is, going back to that concept of having a multi-level bill of material, if I had a product for which it had an intermediate product that had its own bill of material and routing record, if I was to run this standard cost calculation with this box being checked, this would serve to reestablish the standard cost of that lower level intermediate product, then roll up the cost of the parent product that I'm calculating. So it's kind of a way to explode down through the bill of material. All right. So next over here in our fixed cost distribution, we have two different options here, this pro rata option and the total option. Now, if I was to run this with a pro rata option being chosen, what that's going to serve to do is, for my fixed cost, going back to that concept of fixed cost, fixed overheads, fixed labor factors, setup cost, those are all examples of costs that are fixed, that are going to be a constant cost regardless of the amount of processing time that you dedicate to the work order. So if I have that fixed cost distribution to set to pro rata, what it says is whatever fixed costs are in my calculation, go ahead and prorate those fixed costs over the economic order quantity that's defined on the planning tab of the product site. Versus, if I have this setting here set to total, that's going to serve to take those fixed costs and prorate them over this calculation quantity that I have set up in this field. Okay, so it's important to note that if you do have an EOQ defined on your product site, it's going to serve as a default for this calculation quantity in here. But I'm at liberty to update this if I'm so inclined. Next down here, I have my material costs in my various options herein. Now what this setting is in reference to is when the cost calculation is being performed, and X3 looks at the bill of material that's at play. It's going to take a look at the products, take a look at those respective quantities defined on the BOM. Then it's going to go ahead and multiply those respective quantities by either the standard cost of that component, by the revised standard cost of the component, the budgeted cost of the component, simulated cost of the component, last cost of the component, average, last purchase price, or the list price. So you have a variety of different options there. For this exercise, we're going to go ahead and choose the standard costs. Next here, for the dimension rate, now this is in reference to the costing dimensions within X3. And I would encourage you to go and go to the video lecture that I have on costing dimension and overhead setup within X3. And I kind of go into great detail in my explanation of this. But for purposes of this exercise, in terms of establishing a standard cost for the item, we're going to have our standards, the standard element associated with my labor and machine work centers being referenced. Same thing here with my overhead column. So here for my overheads, I have options A, B, C, and D. I'm going to want to choose the option A here, which points to the standard element in my overhead code setup. The B element would refer to the revised element of the overhead, C referring to the budgeted element, and D to the simulated element. Okay, so in this case we're going to do element A. Then finally down here in my update section I have a couple different options. Now if I was to run this cost calculation with the update method set to no here, what this basically will do is simply generate the cost of bill of material report for me that I can analyze and look over, but it's not going to serve to update the standard cost in the system. Okay, so it basically just outputs a report for my review. If I run it with the deferred option, it's going to go ahead and not immediately update the standard cost in the system, but it will go ahead and put those costs in a queue such that they can be updated at a later point in time. Okay, so maybe this deferred option, you could use that in the context of you do the deferred cost update, as you're approaching the end of your fiscal year. Then on the first day of your new fiscal year, you can run the update utility to take your deferred cost and move them into your new standards. Okay. Then finally here we have this immediate option, which is going to serve to immediately redefine the standard cost of this product in the system. Okay. Now over here, this checkbox here for replace previous costs. Now, what this is in reference to, I was alluding to earlier that one can redefine the standard cost of an item at a production facility multiple times throughout the course of the year. But if you didn't want to keep that history of the previously defined standards for that year, you could go ahead and run this utility with this box being checked, and it will simply seek to overwrite the currently defined standard cost. So usually my recommendation is that, maybe when you're in the early goings of things and you find yourself redefining the standard cost multiple times until you get it honed into a figure that looks right to you, you might want to consider having this box checked so you don't have like 50 standard costs for an item until you finally get your good one. But once you get things fine-tuned and you know what you're doing, generally speaking, I think it's a good idea to keep that history. So I usually would run this with this being unchecked. Okay, so let's go ahead and give it a rip. We're going to go do our OK. Gives me a couple different cost of bill of material reports to choose from. I'm going to go ahead and choose the top one and do my print. Okay, so here's the cost of bill of material. Let's blow that up a little bit so you can see it. Alright, so for this production facility, NA021, here's my product. Here's the validity period of this new standard. I have reference to my routing and BOM codes, reference to my material cost selection, dimension and overhead selections, as well as my calculation quantity over here. So it's going to break it down into sections for materials, machines, labors, and overheads. So here's my materials section from my bill of material. So here are all my components. Here are the respective quantity on the BOM. Here's the unit standard cost of each one of these components. The extended cost of the components. If there was any overhead elements associated with the component, it's going to be expressed in this column. Then here's my grand total of my material cost for the batch of 175 units, just over $2,100. Scrolling down here into my machine section, I just have one packaging machine that is being utilized. Okay, and here's my setup in my runtime with my hourly rate of $45 an hour times a half hour, giving me a $22.50 setup cost. Then I do the same math down here for my runtime. So I get another $525 worth of runtime machine costs. Add in the overhead element associated with machine, and giving me a total machine cost for this product of the batch of 175 units of $549. Down here in my labor section, here's my respective labor rate that I pay the employees, $17.25 an hour. The amount of setup time and the amount of run time for the batch. Here's my total costs, including the overhead, giving me a total labor cost of $111. Down here in my overhead details section, this is giving me the breakout of the overheads associated with materials. I have a standard overhead and a plant overhead. Okay, so I'm getting $2 or 2 cents a unit there. Okay, then down at the bottom of this report here, I get my per, in this case it would be per case. So here's my material cost of $12.30, my machine cost of $3.13. There's my labor cost of 62, 2 cents worth of overhead, giving me a total unit cost of $16.08 a case. Multiply that by my batch size of 175, giving me my total cost of the batch of just over $2,800. Okay. So again, that standard being defined as it was, I can now close out of here and come back to my costing menu, or my standard cost menu, common data, products, standard cost. Okay, and there's my respective cost record. Okay, so that's the basics of the standard cost that I wanted to cover here this evening. As always, I hope these lectures are of use to you. If so, I'd ask you to please remember to like and subscribe. And as always, if there's any questions, feel free to inbox me. Thanks again, and we'll tune in soon.